Hi everyone, it's Kirsten. I'm getting settled in here. We have, well, by my clock, another 5 minutes till noon. So it's great to see people popping in. I hope you're getting settled, get your lunch, get something to drink. I just had a yummy cupcake, so I'm all ready to go. I decided I better have my cupcake first and then I'll have lunch afterwards. So I'm still expect a few more people to pop on, but I'm going to mute myself again and I'll be back in about 3 minutes. Okay, this is Kirsten with ICODVA, and I'll get going in just one more minute. I am coming to you from our new office, so I'm sitting amongst some boxes and chaos. We just moved on Friday, and so things are still being unpacked and put away. If any of you have been to Des Moines and been to our office, we are not far from where we used to be. We're just a little bit closer to the highway. Moved, I don't know, maybe 4 blocks up closer towards the highway. It's a little bit smaller spot, and it has absolutely no training space. So I am going to be scrambling in the next day or two to figure out where the in-person training, that's kind of the culmination of these webinars, is going to be, so I can get that information out to people. Because right now, I'm not sure. Hopefully I can find someplace that's close by and easy to find. Alrighty, I have noon, so let's actually begin. So this is Kirsten Faisal. I'm with ICADVA, and this is the second part of a three-part series of webinars. And then after these are done, I am planning a in-person training, just a one-day, like 10 to 4 training, where we can go a little bit more in depth and do some practice on what I'm covering in these 3 webinars. So I hope that people will sign up for that, and I actually probably should do another push to get information out. All of our webinars are recorded. They're available in our online training platform. They're also available on YouTube. If you get on YouTube and search for Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence, you'll find the whole mess of them, and probably a couple other videos too. So if you want to review anything or want to refer somebody to one that has already happened, those are 2 easy places to get a hold of them. So, as I said, this is being recorded, and let me just double check on that just to be sure, because I have one time recently, yes, recording in progress, had that not happen for me. I was like, shoot. So this is Developmental Helping Model Part 2. And let me back up and say that in 1985 is when I went through volunteer training to work at a crisis line. And that is when I first learned this. What I learned then and what I'm conveying to you now is sort of a modified version of what we can call the DHM, because that's a little shorter. The DHM, it's specifically for crisis work, for crisis line and crisis work. And I have been using it since 1985. So it's kind of in my bloodstream at this point. And just as a quick review, in our last episode, we did an overview and covered stage 1. So the DHM is a framework for an approach to help clients. You can find the actual textbook. It was written by Gerard Egan in 1975. The textbook is called The Skilled Helper. I think in 85 we were using like the 3rd edition or something, and I think now it's on the 12th edition. There's been some significant changes throughout, but the textbook is stupid expensive because it's still used in college courses, and nobody wants to run out here, I assume, and go spend $100 on a college textbook. So I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version that is, as I said, specifically designed for crisis line work. It is stripped down. There are no power tools here. There is no glitter. There's no fringe. These are very basic counseling tools. It's nice because it gives you a structured approach, like you do step A, step B, step C, though sometimes it's more like you do step A, step B, step A, step B, step C, step A, step B, step C, step B. But nevertheless, you know exactly what it does. Is it takes the things that I believe that we do naturally because we're in this field, because we are natural helpers and we have listening skills, and makes it conscious. It's like, oh, that's why when I do this thing, it works. And so now that I'm conscious of it, I can actually use it deliberately to improve my listening skills. It's solution focused, and it really aims to answer the questions of what's going on and what do I want instead and how do I get there. One of the things I think it's really important to spend some time on this for is because as folks that do crisis work, I think we spend a lot of time in the how do I get what I want, and not enough in the previous two of what exactly is going on and what is my preferred state. What else do I want instead? We are automatically in this crisis solving, to-do mode, problem solving, without actually spending the time to build the relationship and get some of the information that would make it be a more successful process. So it's broken into 3 stages. The first one is rapport and explore. That is where you are trying to build your relationship with this person. You're using empathy. You're getting at why are they talking to you today? What's important to them? What do they value? What is their perspective on what's going on? That moves into what we're going to talk about today, which is feeling like I think of that stage 1 as being the top part of an iceberg, and stage 2, the understanding and expanding, is that bottom half of the iceberg. So now you've built up enough of a relationship with them that you can begin to get to some of the stuff that they may not have shared initially, stuff that they might be ashamed of, or think that you'll misunderstand, or they're not clear on themselves, and you're kind of exploring together to get some clarification because this is a strange new world. So there sometimes are new concerns that are raised in that process, and you might have to go back to building some rapport again. This is a place where you can challenge people a little and push and prod. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And then the third stage is action planning, where you're defining goals and identifying a specific course or courses, actually, of actions. And in order to make that effective, that's why it's really important to spend some time focusing on values. What is important? What does that person really want? And how are they going to make it happen in a way that is truly going to work for them? So, as I said, 3 stages: current picture, what they want instead, and how they're going to move forward. That's the framework. It's those questions. I want to get to the next material. So again, briefly, what we've talked about. In stage 1, the goal is to respond, right? And we went over each of these skills, that you're going to be genuine. You're not going to be a superhero in a cape, right? You're going to be showing respect in a lot of ways. And then the real concrete things that you're doing is using empathy and asking good questions. And there's specific stems for that, and I'll go over stems again in a couple slides. And through this, as that caller is learning to trust you, is feeling like they're not being judged, is feeling like this is a safe place to talk about stuff, they can begin to explore what's going on in their current situation. This is critical to me, and I think people underestimate the power of simply being present as yourself, as a genuine human being, offering respect and empathy. One of the things that trauma does, particularly trauma that is caused by other human beings, is it destroys our basic human contract that we have as a species. We have this understanding, person to person, that we are connected, that we need each other for survival. And when another human being does something to destroy that, the person is isolated, they don't know who to trust, all of those things. Sometimes there is absolutely nothing you can offer to someone in terms of resources, ideas, suggestions, something that will help their pain, except unconditional respect and empathy. If you can just do that, you have begun that process of restoring that human connection. So this is the fundamental ability, and we tend to think that it's nothing. I just listen to them. Sometimes that's everything. So you've done all of that in stage 1, and if I didn't look to make sure everybody that's on this one had seen the first one. If you haven't seen the first one, please go back and take a look at that webinar. And if you're recommending anybody pay attention to these webinars and watch them later, please start them on the first one. So, ta-da, we're on stage 2. As I said, you'll always be going back and forth between stages. It's kind of like grief, where people flow in and out until they kind of get to that resolution thing. But we're gonna pretend that it's a solid by itself stage for today to talk about. So with this one, your goal is, as I said, to integrate that understanding. Like maybe you had a piece over here of something and then there was another piece over there, and let's pull those two together and see if they match or not, see if those work together, see if there's something there, a thread we can follow, or there's some piece that's still really unclear to me. I need to check it out. And the caller is kind of along for you to have this shifting understanding of their self, their situation, to get a new perspective on what's going on. Hopefully, because you've built the rapport, to be non-defensive, because you are going to be finding ways to offer them some feedback on what's going on at this point, which makes it very clear why this has to be stage 2, right? Because you don't really want to hear and you don't give a crap about feedback from somebody that you have no relationship with, right? You and I don't want to do that, much less anybody that we're trying to help. So you have to do the relationship building first. So this is getting below the surface of that iceberg. And you have, as a listener, these are the 4 skills we're going to go over. And I am going to break them down in nauseating detail. Additive empathy. So think of that as empathy plus more empathy. Confrontation, which at its surface sounds, ooh, confrontation is scary. I don't like that word. It makes my tummy kind of tight. Immediacy, what the heck is that? That means dealing with something that's happening right now, the immediate issue, as opposed to what's going on in their world that they were talking about. And then self-disclosure. And again, you might be going, oh, no, I don't like self-disclosing. That's fine. We'll talk about it. So let's start with that additive empathy. Additive empathy is a skill where you're taking 2 pieces that maybe seem to fit together and you're integrating them. You're putting them together to let's talk about this right here. It might be what you want to do is you want to encourage that person to explore their feelings and their behaviors and experiences a bit more in depth, to share them a bit more in depth. So it may be that there's things going on that they simply haven't told you, or that they're actually not aware of. But I'm sure you've had a point where you said to somebody, wow, that sounds really scary. And they're so numb that the frightening aspect of it, or maybe anger or whatever, that's so underneath everything else, that's so tucked away that they're not even aware of it anymore, because really they're just numb. Or any feeling because feelings feel out of control, they're not even sure what they feel anymore. They're not sure, when I feel this or that in my body, what does that feeling mean emotionally? So helping them to express underlying feelings that they either are just not saying or are not aware of. If you notice recurring things happening for them, pointing that out. Or if there are places where they actually do have control, to be able to pull that out and, okay, let's take a look at this. It may be that the person doesn't respond to or doesn't necessarily like some additive empathy statement that you have offered. In that case, you can go right back and use concreteness. Back to stage 1. How are you feeling about what I just said? Or even, what did you hear me say just now? because it may have triggered something else and they're feeling upset, they're feeling vulnerable, who knows. I'm aware you've gotten quieter. I'm wondering how you feel about what I just said. So all of those kinds of questions are available to you as tools throughout this whole stage 2 to kind of bring things back as you're probing a little deeper and getting into some more emotional waters and some more confrontational waters. So I'm gonna give you a STEM for each one of those uses of additive empathy. Let's talk about STEMs. You probably say things like this in lots of different ways in your everyday language. The idea of using a STEM is it helps you to focus on the deliberateness of what you're saying and why. And so I really encourage people to use these exact words and no others when they are practicing and learning the DHM. It feels really strange and uncomfortable. That tells me that you're learning. Like, nobody learns things when they feel completely at home and like they already know what they're doing. Being uncomfortable and awkward is part of learning. So it's hard, it's frustrating, but it is part of the learning process. So the easiest one, the one that you would probably use most often, is the underlying feeling STEM. And that's very easy. It's while you say you feel whatever, it sounds like you also feel whatever. It may be that you're hearing something different from their expressed feeling in their voice tone or their word choices, what's being left out, what they're not being said, their body language. It could just be an empathetic or educated guess based on your work with other folks. So I'm wondering if you're also feeling is kind of a question. I'm guessing you might also be feeling, and okay, maybe you can use those. But when you do that, it ends up being question, 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 and you end up falling into that interrogation instead of listening. So I like that this is a statement. You're not telling somebody what they feel. You're offering it there, and you will either be right, in which case they will feel like, wow, this person really does get me, they understand, or you'll be off and they'll correct you, and you can, and then that's your opportunity to essentially restate it and say, oh, okay, so you're feeling blah, blah, blah. And then you both have clarity. So STEMs are great. They work if you get it right, and they work if you get it wrong. So let me give you some examples. Again, unexpressed ones are often things that aren't said because of trust issues or shame, or things aren't socially acceptable, or sometimes even it's just a harder feeling to feel. While you say you feel embarrassed your daughter spit on the other kids at the dance recital, it sounds like you also feel worried about her behavior. That would be a real life example from my daughter spitting on the other kids at dance recital. While you say you feel sad your grandpa died, it sounds like you also feel relieved he's out of his pain. That would be another real life example from my life. You're not supposed to feel glad that somebody has died, but for those of us who have lost somebody to cancer, and it's been a really hard, painful struggle, there is some relief there, but you're not really supposed to say that. While you say you feel irritated that your friend asked if you are safe at home, it sounds like you also feel disturbed that he's seeing behaviors that do make you uncomfortable. So that's underlying feelings, and that's the one that I use more than anything else. Here's what I'm seeing, and here's the unspoken. The next one is the one about patterns, and sometimes it's easier to see a pattern when you're one step removed of it. When you're in the mess, it's hard to have perspective. So this one would sound something like, when faced with telling your sister that that her husband made a pass at you, you choose to avoid having that conversation, and it leaves you feeling like you're lying to her, right? So when faced with whatever that pattern is that you're seeing happen, and then the behavior you choose to, it leaves you feeling and what they keep ending up feeling. When faced with your mom ignoring your house rules when she watches your kids, you choose to let it go, and it leaves you feeling frustrated and disrespected. It doesn't have to be a self-defeating or, quote, bad pattern that you are pointing out. It never hurts to point out strengths or progress that you're seeing that is a recurring pattern. So things like when faced with your cravings for mess, you choose to practice your grounding skills, and it leaves you feeling proud you can manage until the urge passes. When faced with your landlord repeatedly letting himself into your apartment without notifying you, you choose to get help and send him a notification letter instead of screaming at him, and it leaves you feeling more powerful and in control of the situation. The use of the word choose in this stem is deliberate because it's a way of underlining that the person that you're dealing with, that they have agency, that they have power, that they are making choices, they are doing things in their life. And so it gives back that sense of control. So again, the stems are very specifically chosen, and you probably do this in lengthy ways or with slightly different words. But here, by thinking about it and using this deliberately, you know why you're using it and when you're using it. Okay, so there's one more. This is the one that I have used the least, and sometimes when I'm doing this kind of training, I even leave this one out, though it does have a purpose. Again, it's about highlighting underlying agency that person has, and it moves them towards action planning. It moves them towards taking steps. The reason I use it the least is because with the particular client population, if you will, that we are dealing with, they're already often very good at beating themselves up over their shortcomings or at their perceived shortcomings, right? They have the person causing harm in their life, letting them know that they're failing, and then they take that on. And so if you're not careful using this one, it can come off as emphasizing or agreeing with some of those very harsh self-assessments. But it can also be used to show that the person is engaging in harmful self-talk. So you feel disappointed because you yelled at your children again, and you want to use some other parenting strategies you've been learning, right? You feel frustrated because you got another overdraft notice, and you want to stick to a budget. Those can be moving. So then that would be a great way to push to what we're not going to talk about today, which is planning. It's like, so you're feeling this tension of the difference between what you want and what's happening. So let's talk about how you could get there. This one is a good bridge to that next step of, okay, let's talk about how can we support what you actually want, because what's happening now isn't working. So those are the three stems for additive empathy. And I'm hoping you've got that down and you're ready to move on. This gets a little thick. There's a lot here to absorb, and I understand that. That's one of the reasons why I want to have an all-day session to go through them again and really work with them in practice. That's also a reason why the handout there is this PowerPoint, so that you can take a look at it at your leisure. So confrontation is the next skill we're going to look at, and that is describing lots of things that don't go together. You're seeing this, but that doesn't really go with this thing over here. So it's discrepancies or distortions in what they're saying or their behaviors. It's not just focused on problem areas. It's also beautiful for uncovering strengths, and actually that's how I use it the most. Clearly, again, you have to have rapport established first, and you need to be clear on your motives for confronting. It should be for that person and not because you're suddenly wanting to get a load off your chest or frustrated. And it's going to be as strong or as soft as the strength of that rapport you've developed, right? Don't get too hung up on it. There's 5 basic types, and don't get too hung up on what kind is what, but I do want to go through them and show you all of the different ways that confrontation can be used. The goal is to challenge, and that it can be a positive challenge, it can be a strength challenge, as much as it can be a challenge of, this isn't quite working, or this doesn't make sense to me. So here's the stem, and this one is really easy. On the one hand, you feel, say, or do, but on the other hand, you feel, say, or do. And I always, I often will take notes when I'm on the phone counseling, and this to me is OTOH, OTOH. On the one hand, on the other hand. You can make it a little stronger if you're inserting yourself to say, on the one hand you feel, but it looks to me like you feel, say, or do. It's a little bit stronger. It's a little bit pushier. The difference between this and additive empathy is that these things that don't or can't go together comfortably, and in additive empathy they can. So here's some things I'm pulling out that we should probably talk about or review. So here's all the different kinds of confrontations they are. And as I said, don't get too caught up in this part so much as the on the one hand, on the other hand. So didactic confrontation just really means that there's misinformation that is completely objective, right? It's not about opinion. It's used when that person is misinformed, or they're making assumptions about the behavior of other people. They're mind reading, right? Or they have boundary difficulties that, again, are very specific. So it's misinformation. That's not real, and it's an objective fact. On the one hand, you're afraid you'll get AIDS from using a public restroom, but on the other hand, doctors say AIDS is not transmitted that way. Which kind of leads us to the next one, which is looking at personal liabilities, places where they have some need areas, or this one's I get a bit stronger pushing, is where their behavior and their values are not, they're not in accord. So on the one hand, you say you value honesty, but on the other hand, you also say you're always lying to your attorney. All right, so let's pull that out and talk about that. What's going on there? Sometimes it's because they've got a lot of unexamined values or shoulds. Sometimes it's some self-destructive stuff going on. Sometimes it's fear. But let's pull that out and talk about it. So you say you value this, but I'm seeing this over here with your behavior. My favorite one is the strength, and that's where they are not recognizing their own strengths or the resources or the hard work they've been doing, right? On the one hand, you say you're weak because you let your husband beat you. On the other hand, it takes a strong person to survive that kind of abuse. On the one hand, you say you have no skills. On the other hand, you told me you're working 30 hours a week, going to school full time, and raising 3 kids. That sounds like someone who's efficient and great at organizing, which is a lot more powerful when you say it that way than to say, on the one hand, you say you have no skills, but on the other hand, I think you do. Strength confrontations are most powerful when you are using specific evidence that they have given you, right? Or if you're using your personal experience of them. You know, on the one hand, you say you're a bad mom. On the other hand, I've watched the way you treat your kids with respect and set boundaries. Then they can't really argue because, like, here's the evidence. Then on the one hand, you say you're a bad mom, but I think you're good. They can just brush that off. which leads to the next kind, which is, again, it's about a discrepancy between what they say and what they do, how they view themselves, how others view them, how you view them, your experience with them. On the one hand, you say you shouldn't have called because you're wasting my time with something silly, but it looks to me like this is something very important to you, and I want to listen. On the one hand, you say you're good at planning. On the other hand, the landlord just called to say your rent was late again. On the one hand, you think your sister doesn't trust you, but on the other hand, she's asked you to babysit. So that's about differences in experience. The final one is encouraging somebody to take action. And if you have any knowledge or experience with motivational interviewing, it's about creating more discrepancy, more irritation, whatever, so that they want to actually make that change. On the one hand, you're worried about finding a job, but on the other hand, you have 2 good leads you can follow. On the one hand, drinking with you. On the one hand, you enjoy drinking with your friend on the weekend. On the other hand, you're starting to worry about how often you're drunk. On the one hand, you're sick of your partner constantly checking up on where you are. On the other hand, you know you want a relationship built on trust. So all of those things can be bridges then to, so what can we do? How can I help you to change whatever that situation is? But as I said, don't worry too much about what kind. Just memorize on the one hand, on the other hand. And that's a confrontation. And it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to mean that somebody's going to get their back up. It can mean, let's pull these 2 things out and examine them. The next thing is immediacy. This is where, if you think about the person talking to you about something out there, you're saying, hang on, we're actually going to talk about what's happening right now. That usually means right now between us. So you're taking the focus off of their concern and you're putting it on the relationship between you. Problems can arise because of communication style differences, misunderstandings, cultural differences, misinformation, like what the heck is an advocate, trust issues, all kinds of things. You may feel that you're being manipulated. You may feel like there's some dependency issues. It's really good for defining roles in a relationship. And I think this is important, especially because, again, what the heck is an advocate? People know what the boundaries are with a doctor. They know how that relationship works with a police officer, with a teacher. But when you say I'm an advocate, that doesn't really mean anything. So sometimes you have to say, okay, wait a minute, let's just back up and we're going to clarify some boundaries, right? You don't have to wait for a problem to check in and know how things are going. So you can actually, at any point, stop and do some immediacy. Say, okay, so how do you feel our work together is going? Is this helpful to you? Are there parts that aren't helpful? What would be more helpful? You can use it to check in after one of the previous things, like you did a confrontation and they went dead silent. How do you feel about what I just said? Sometimes you may have a gut reaction and you just want to check in and make sure what's going on here. Again, sometimes we're pushed into roles. The person may have lots of needs, and these are just a few of them. And for many folks, it has not been safe to express their intentions or their needs directly. Instead, they've always had to kind of go around the corners and get what their needs met in ways that were not always pretty or out in front or whatever. And so immediacy can be about, hey, what's going on between us? Let's clarify what I can do. Let's clarify what you need from me. And there are some limits and some boundaries, and there's some things I cannot do. I am going to give you stems for this, but quite frankly, this is one that's a little bit more stemless than the others. Like the hey, is this conversation working for you? Are there things that I'm doing that aren't working? Is there something else we should be doing that you need right now? That's immediacy. It just doesn't fit into a stem. So, but here's a couple. Right now, again, that focus on immediately. Right now, I sense you want whatever from me. Right now, I sense you want absolution from me. Right now, I sense you want for me to be your friend. Right now, I sense you're feeling whatever. Right now, I sense you're feeling angry toward me because I confronted you. Right now, I sense you're feeling scared toward me because that question was too personal. There's another one. Right now, when I hear you XYZ behavior or see you XYZ behavior, I find myself feeling, this is much more personal, and I want to. When I hear you repeatedly blaming yourself for your partner's abuse, I find myself feeling sad, and I notice myself wishing you could see through my eyes. Again, that's pointing out strengths. That's saying what's going on right now here is I'm having this big reaction internally, and I don't want it to make this relationship about me, but I do want to give you a little bit of a different perspective, right? And so I wish you could see through my eyes what's going on and how I see you, that you are not the person that your partner keeps saying you are. Right now, when you keep using the wrong gender pronouns for me, I find myself feeling disrespected, and I want to clarify why that's important to me. Right now, when I hear you contradicting yourself and changing what you say happen, I find myself feeling worried that you think I'm going to judge you, and I want to let you know that your situation is not uncommon, and sometimes survival skills aren't pretty. Again, you have to be cautious about bringing your relationship into focus, because you don't want them to be in a situation where they feel like they need to take care of your feelings, but you do want to make sure that your relationship is honest and clear, right? So this is great for setting boundaries and checking in. Now, here's the one that sometimes people are like, oh, this is great information, and sometimes people are like, never. And what I would say is, if you don't ever want to self-disclose anything, then you don't have to. So it's completely optional. But I do think that there is a role for self-disclosure, and that role is very limited and very specific, but it's very powerful in that place. And so it's useful when you have some experience that's similar to the person that you're talking with, and you're wanting to pull out a feeling, right? And the reasons why is self-disclosure can build trust. Self-disclosure, if that person is feeling like no one has ever felt that way, no one has ever been such a horrible person that they would feel that way, if they're feeling isolated, if there are things that you are just sure, feelings that you are sure are part of that big iceberg underneath there, but they don't want to share them, self-disclosure is one way to get at that feeling. And notice I keep saying feeling, because it isn't so much about the similar situation as it is about the feeling that we have in common. The DHM is based on the idea that as human beings, the one thing that we share with all other human beings is our emotions. We all know what anger feels like, that we might get angry about different things. We all know what shame feels like, but there are different things that we find shameful. So self-disclosure is about focusing on a feeling, and there's a particular way to use it, right? And what I want you to be thinking about if you're going to self-disclose is, why am I doing this, right? Is it for the purpose of getting at some some feeling or making that connection, building that rapport? Or is it because I suddenly have something I need to get off my chest? Because if that's the case, that's not a good reason. So before you self-disclose, you need to figure out why you want to do it. And is it the right time to do it? Sometimes you need to just bite your tongue. It might be useful later, but right now that person is in a wash of just blah, 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 and they're just gushing. You don't want to interrupt that stream by suddenly talking about yourself. Is it something that you're willing to share? Is it something that's too personal? You don't want to suddenly get overwhelmed and start crying yourself, right? Is it personally and culturally appropriate to be sharing? Is it going to be seen as not professional to share, or is it going to be seen as cold and distant and unprofessional to not be sharing? Are there possible consequences? Are they then going to think that you're best friends? Did you smear that boundary line so much? There might be some clients that you self-disclose with and other clients that you wouldn't, based on relationship boundary issues. How long and in what ways are you working with that person? During the self-disclosure, you need to stay focused and concise. It's always like, if you can't say it in 2 or 3 sentences, then you've turned it into a counseling session for yourself, and you shouldn't be saying it. During it, you're going to be paying attention to how they receive the disclosure, and self-disclosure isn't an excuse for inflicting your personal values or solutions. Like, well, may I share something with you? When I was in college and I had an unintended pregnancy, I got an abortion. How would that fit for you? That's inflicting your personal values and solutions on somebody. After a self-disclosure, I think of it as like a ball. Like they've got the ball is in their court, the conversation ball, and you kind of take it away for a minute to self-disclose. You immediately want to hand it back. So you're turning the focus back to them. You're checking in for their response to what you said, and you also have to be prepared to keep like pushing the ball back into their court, because sometimes what can happen is they want to keep it on you, and they want you to keep self-disclosing and talk more. And that's when you need a response, always like, well, what I did, because it's usually like, well, what did you do when that happened? What I did doesn't matter, because it's not exactly the same as your situation, and it was a different time and might not work. I'd really rather we tried to find out what might help you. Here's your stem. May I share something with you? And then you wait for permission. I have actually asked somebody that, and they told me no. I was like, okay, I'm not going to be sharing anything. May I share something with you? Nope. I called to talk. Great. Let's roll with it. Whatever that similar situation is, and you have to actually say what that situation is. If you say, when I was in a similar situation, all you're doing is setting yourself up for the person to say, what was that similar situation? So you just very concisely plug it in there. When I felt what the feeling was, and then you're immediately throwing that ball back. How does that fit for you? So for example, the person is saying, well, my spouse meant everything in the world to me. We did everything together. I don't know how I'm going to make it alone. And you might come back with, may I share something with you? Well, if you think it'll help. When my best friend died, I felt directionless. How does that fit for you? Okay, we are getting towards the end. So here's some I said, I know I've blasted you with a lot of stems. When I originally began teaching this back in the 80s, we would spend hours and hours and hours, 40 hours actually, of training just on this. So you could do one stem at a time and just practice one stem at a time, one skill at a time. And that is actually one of the ways I would recommend that you go about learning and practicing this. Just say, you know what? I'm going to spend the next day or two just focusing on additive empathy and seeing if I can find an opportunity to just use that skill and see how it goes and let myself feel awkward. So when people start, they're often confused. People will often avoid these stage 2 stems because the empathy feels much easier. You feel blank because blank seems a whole lot easier. And as I said, confusion is just part of the learning. People will get so focused on their learning that they forget to pay attention to what the impact is of what they said. Like, did that person just clam up, shut up? Did they make a face? Scene stealing is often a problem with the self-disclosure. Be concise. You don't want to become the subject of the conversation. You don't want to self-disclose with everybody. You know that. You want to use it judiciously for a specific purpose, to build rapport, make somebody feel like they're not alone, reduce shame, and not to tell your own story. People are sometimes reluctant to confront, and I would remind you that there's just as much confronting of the person's strengths, their power, their resources, their wanting to change, their ideas towards change, that all of that is wonderful. And I would say that sometimes people will get the idea that being trauma-informed means that you never confront somebody, that you don't have, that there's no boundaries there, and that's really a false reading of what that means. Giving somebody feedback on how some of their behaviors may be complicating or even causing some of their problems, like maybe one of the reasons that DHS, Child Protective Services, is being so awful to you is because every time you call them, you scream at them, and they think that you're the problem. They think you're hard to work with. That there are ways that it's important to give people feedback, and this gives you tools for doing that. Mm-hmm. Along with that, sometimes people are reluctant to use immediacy. You feel uncomfortable, but you think maybe you're being manipulated, but you don't want to call it out. Particularly, I think, as for those of you who are female, who are raised as female, you're trained to be nice, and being nice means not being like going ahead and feeling uncomfortable, so long as other people feel happy. Another common difficulty is then once you feel the power of using some of these skills, particularly confronting about weaknesses or using immediacy skills about manipulation, sometimes you immediately leap in and tend to jump on it. Callers who say, well, what should I do, are not necessarily trying to be manipulative and push you into the role of solving everything for them. A little empathy of you feel confused or you feel frustrated can work wonders, as opposed to jumping in when you feel like they're pushing you. I'm going to give you the same ideas around practice that I did for the last section, and that is talk back to your media. So if you are watching a movie, if you're reading a book, if you're if you see something in your social media stream, think about what would be the stem that you could use to respond to that person, right? So talk back to your media, even if it's just in your head, but also try it with family and friends. I promise you, people will not know what you're doing. You can try it one skill at a time. Like, I'm just going to remind myself on the one hand, on the other hand, on the one hand, on the other hand today, and see what happens with that, and see if I can make that work for me. When you're not actively learning the DHM, you'll kind of incorporate these and use these skills using your own language. You'll make it personal, you'll make it yourself, but the stems are important for the learning. To review, when you hear two things that don't go together, that's confrontation on the one hand, on the other hand. When you hear two things that can go together and it would be interesting to delve into them if you put them side by side, that's additive empathy. That's empathizing with this and empathizing with this. Let's add them together. If you see a pattern or recurring situation, that's additive empathy. If you see somewhere where the person has or wants to control and wants to make a change, that's additive empathy. If you feel manipulated or you feel that there's a correction needed for your relationship, or you just want to check in on how it's going for that person, that's immediacy. If there's a place there to build trust and reduce shame, that's self-disclosure. That little review, that in a nutshell, is everything that I've just spent the last hour talking about. One of the things I appreciate about my partner is every so often out of the blue, he'll just say, so how is this working for you? How is our relationship? Is there anything that I could be doing better? Or is there anything that I should not be doing? And it's just because he asks that question is so helpful in my relationship to him and my ability to talk with him. And I think that's something that would be great for us to incorporate regularly into our work. Some of those immediacy skills. How is this working for you right now? Okay, so there is going to be another set. There's going to be stage 3, and that's action planning. That will be on July 30th. And then on August 9th is the in-person day to review, to practice, to dive a little bit deeper in how these skills can be used. I will be trying to get a place set up for that this week now that we have mostly moved, and now that it was kind of in a hurry, and I know that now I have no training space here on site, so I'm going to have to figure that out from now on. But I will get that sent out to you. I will also get a link sent out again to everybody in the group email with information about watching the webinars and attending that. If there's somebody who you think, okay, maybe they weren't interested before, but now 2 webinars in, you think, hey, let's do this together and come to the one day in person with me. And that's all I have to say. So, is there any comments or questions? I'm thinking at this point your head is probably spinning. Believe it or not, I do actively use these, and I do have them working in the back of my head. Sometimes I actually use the stems, and sometimes I don't. After I was trained in it, I think all but one of my siblings ended up going through the training. My mother went through the training, and so the entire family DHMs each other and uses this skill all over the place all the time. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, any comments, so I'm going to wish you a good afternoon. I hope that you're staying cool because it's a little toastier this week, so I think the rain here at least cooled things off a little bit in the morning. It's kind of warm, so stay cool, have a good afternoon, and I hope to see you on, today was I said, I hope to see you back in the webinar on July 30th. Okay, thank you.